Thank you all for signing in. Our guests tonight. We'll look forward to hearing from all of you. We'll start with opening the session formally, and I will ask Bessie Jo to take roll call of all council.
Councilmember Kellen. Here. Mayor Giles.
Here.
Councilmember Holmes. Present. Councilmember Machesik.
Present.
Councilmember Nielsen.
Yes.
Thank you, council. There's our American flag behind me.
Yep.
If everyone could stand, we'll lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item is approval of the agenda. Look for a motion and a second to approve our published agenda for tonight's meeting.
Move we approve the agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded to approve the agenda. We will take care of this with a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. Second item is consent agenda, and that will be with roll call vote. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you both. Motion has been made, seconded to approve the consent agenda. May I please have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Kellen.
Yes.
Councilmember Holmes.
Yes.
Mayor Giles.
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik. Councilmember Nielsen.
Yes.
That motion carries. All right, our first item after that is a general public comment. We had a fair amount of information out for this week to comment on, and we had for written comments 3 o'clock deadline. We have the opportunity tonight to hear comments, and we also had an opportunity to do it by teams. I think we're down to the 2 options. We're going to hear first from the city clerk to summarize written comments. They were pretty robust, and they concerned 2 main topics. One was the topic of our ordinance having to do with banning the feeding of certain wildlife. And then the second topic was an ordinance, a classification involved with planning for subdivisions outside the city limits. So let's start with the clerk's summary on written comments.
Yes. So, we had the most interest was with the wildlife ordinance. There were approximately 353 people who sent written comments. Of those comments, 127 were from people with a McCall address, showing 18 in favor of the ordinance, 2 neutral, and 107 against. Many of those against expressed they were mostly against the removal, relocation, or euthanasia of the deer, and some were in favor of prohibiting the feeding of wildlife. There were 8 comments from unknown locations, stating 1 for the ordinance, 1 neutral, and 6 against. And then there were 218 comments from people that do not have a McCall address, some of which do not even live in Idaho. These comments were all against the removal, relocation, or euthanasia of the deer.
Can we have a total?
A total of,
want a total. 4 against total.
Sure. Hold on. So 4 was 19, 3 was neutral. And so of all of them, 325. Oh, plus 6, 31.
Thank you, Bessie Jo. So those are Those are written comments and they'll be part of our permanent record, the official record at least, and go into the minutes.
Yes, Mayor, and we also had comments related to resolution 21-25 area of concern. There were, I didn't have the exact number for those, but they were all in favor of the resolution.
So the area of critical concern, all the comments that we received in writing were in favor?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's no one on Teams because we were able to accommodate everyone. They were able to make it here tonight. I mean, no one on Teams as far as public comment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So, well, next part will be, I will be calling on each of you that have signed up and we'll hear from you. We have a podium here so that we can all see you, and we will definitely be listening very carefully and would appreciate your hearing from you. We have a very full agenda tonight, lots of interesting topics, and we would like to stay on track with all of those. So our normal rule will be strictly enforced. It's 3 minutes once you start in. I will ask each of you to state your name and address for the public record, and then we will time you at 3 minutes. I've been pretty lax in the past, but when 3 minutes are up, I will cut you off. I really try not to be rude. I'm just trying to keep us on track. So thank you for your humor and good attitude towards that. All right, Julie, you are up first.
Is it okay if I switch places with Lou? Because I have a commitment that they need to get to. Can I go?
Sure.
And you go first?
Sure, Lou,
Yeah, that's me.
you're up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
It's Lou Ross, correct?
Yes, it is. My name is Lou Ross and I live at 915 Camas Place. And actually, I'm on a thing with these
Yeah, it's
two
nice to-
gentlemen. I
nice
think
to
it's
see
the
you in
first time
person.
I've met you, but good to meet you. I'm speaking really on behalf of my wife today. My wife deplores public speaking. She's sitting right here. Her name's Colleen. And the only thing more upsetting to her than anything being done to the deer is the idea of having to speak in public. So I pretend I'm her. She's much better looking. But so this is a letter she wrote, and she really wanted me to read because it conveys the depth of her feeling on the topic. I am heartbroken that this proposed ordinance has gotten this far. Apparently, the powers that be have already made a decision, but I think it's a bad one, and I'm completely against it. A major reason many of us love living in McCall is our close relationship to nature, our beautiful lake, Ponderosa Park, the surrounding mountains, and yes, wildlife, especially the town deer and foxes. Yes, they occasionally complicate things, but if they could speak, I'm sure they would say we've done the same for them. We live in a very busy street with a blind curve that is posted 20 miles per hour, but the average speed driven is much higher. Many drive more than 30 miles per hour. Often no thought is given to the safety of any person or animal on or adjacent to the street. Last night, our peaceful evening was interrupted by a young man driving an SUV who was forced to come to a stop because a young fawn and mother deer were crossing the roadway. The young driver yelled out his window, and I'll spare you the expletive, but begins with an F, you. I thought there was an altercation going on, but there were no other people or cars out there. He was yelling, he was yelling an expletive at the deer. I do not understand that mentality, but we see aggressive driving, honking, intentional driving at speed to scare animals and deer. And to me, it says volumes about our sense of entitlement and our species' lack of empathy for other life. So instead of getting mad at deer, foxes, or wildlife in town, let's try to figure out how to live with them. Spend money on better traffic signs, give tickets to perennial speeders, better educate visitors and residents about how to coexist with wildlife, and generally be grateful for the fact that we do have wildlife around us. That is part of the magic of McCall, after all. We cared enough about wildlife and the wonder of nature to enact anti-light pollution ordinance. Why can't we learn to live with nature instead of killing or removing it from town? We might as well all move back to the suburbs at that point. Since some apparently want to fast track this ordinance, the final thing that breaks my heart is that the city councils may not give the issue the public hearing it deserves. Well, maybe tonight we're getting that, so thanks for that. This ordinance is not about helping the deer, but about appeasing a small group of people who seem to have a point of view that I do not think makes sense financially, scientifically, or morally. Nor is it workable at a practical level. After all the deer removed, do you think other deer are not going to move back into town to replace the removed deer? Passing an ordinance without thorough public hearing and live testimony would leave wounds in the community.
3 minutes.
To me, that would be the most heartbreaking thing of all.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Sorry I ran over.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for hearing my wife and I out. And I guess we're leaving now. Because we have something else we have to do. Which is not because this isn't an important issue to us, by the way, but it's just something else.
Thank you both.
I feel like we can skip.
I love
It'll
it.
be recorded, it's recorded, so if you would like to view, it'll be on the website.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Julie, would you like to go next?
I'm Julie Conrad, and I live in McCall at 1423 Eagle Drive. And I just gotta break the ice with that one. So you guys know who you're talking to, who's talking. That's me. That's me. Mom said don't do it, but I did. So just want to say thank you for letting me speak tonight. And it's about a subject that is extremely near and dear to my heart. No pun intended on that. And I would honestly would rather be anywhere tonight than be here and feel like I have to be here. I mean, I'd be boating and wake surfing with my buddies. I'd be biking. I would be at a dear friend's barbecue that's going on the lake right now. I'd be training for a half marathon. Wait, no, that's your job. So, but you get my point, you do. But I felt I must be here and be a voice for someone who cannot speak, and that is our local deer population. I've been coming to McCall with my family and our two cabins for 58 years and have now lived here full-time for 12 years on a McCall golf course. I simply cannot imagine a McCall without town deer. It is a privilege to live in McCall and among the deer and wildlife. I can't imagine our children, grandchildren, and all future generations not being able to experience the beauty, the magic, and the wild of McCall. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that this issue or idea of trapping, transporting, and euthanizing our town deer is even on the table with much more pressing issues such as the city budget, the waterways, the traffic in our town, the housing issue, the infrastructure issues, all that face our city, and that's just our short list. And if it is such a pressing issue, which I really have my serious doubts about, why is it the most radical and final outcome being considered first? Does the city council and the leaders even realize that if you do vote yes on a no-feed ordinance, it will apparently give the Fish and Game the go-ahead to start their full eradication process of all of our town deer? And to what end? Doesn't matter if the town deer live in Ponderosa State Park, Brundage, Jug, Bear, if they migrate, if they don't migrate, they will be rounded up and eradicated. Why not educate versus eradicate? Educate the public with an ongoing massive campaign for visitors and residents on how to live with the wildlife, as our neighboring states do. Form a task group and a study group. Review neighboring states' fish and game programs and what worked and what didn't. I spent the majority of my time last week researching and talking by phone with fish and game wildlife officers, biologists, and wildlife conflict managers from Utah, Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. They all voice the same concern and sentiment, and that is that translocation of the deer does not work. 2 reasons: less than 50% of all of those deer will survive the transport or the relocation aspect because of the stress. 2, the cost being extreme, being upwards of $1,000 per deer in our neighboring states. Who's going to pay for that? Surely not Fish and Game, surely not the city council, taxpayers, I'm assuming. And am I to believe that the fate of our town and the fate of our deer in McCall at the hands of 2 individuals who didn't even grow up here, one from California and one from Texas?
So Julie, we've reached 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So I just want to say thank you. And I pray and implore you guys to reconsider what this is leading to. Thanks.
Thank you. Marcia Whitty, you're next up. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, we're being on the side. New development since I was on city council. So Marcie Woody, 669 Woodlands Drive. Good evening, Mayor Giles and members of the city council. I submitted written comment prior to this meeting regarding the agenda bill before you to request a resolution that would designate the 2 parcels owned by Pine Creek Ranch LLC as an area of critical concern. I hope you had a chance to review my letter, or will do so later after this meeting. I just want to highlight a few points here. The 2 parcels are conceptually proposed to be developed into a large subdivision called Pine Creek Ranch. I live in the Woodlands and am extremely concerned about the impact of this development on the McCall community at large, and in particular on street safety in the Woodlands. In the conceptual plan that was shared with our neighborhood by the developer, this subdivision is huge. If developed under R4 zoning, the number of home sites in Pine Creek Ranch could be 5 times the number of home sites in the Woodlands, or as another point of reference, more than twice the number of home sites in Spring Mountain Ranch. A subdivision of this size would have profound and long-term impacts on McCall in terms of the population, potentially adding several thousand more residents and demands on infrastructure and services. And yet the proposed access to this major subdivision is currently via 2 local streets in established quiet neighborhoods, the Woodlands and Fox Ridge. There are 2 other access points to the property, Stockton Court and Knights Road, but these will not provide any kind of practical access or disperse traffic in any meaningful way, given their condition and their location. The local streets in the Woodlands and Fox Ridge were not designed or built to be major or even minor collectors. Woodlands Drive is narrow and has no shoulders or sidewalks. Cars have to move into the opposite lane if anyone is walking or biking on the road, which current residents often do. Visibility is poor, particularly in the winter when the snowbanks make it difficult for residents to exit their driveways. Woodlands Drive is the only access to the adjacent middle and elementary schools and to the city's pathway network on public rights-of-way. Increased traffic on this road would make it unsafe for pedestrians and bikers, including children going back and forth to school. If you pass the resolution tonight, I would strongly urge you to request that the environmental assessment include careful study of the impact of any new traffic on the safety of our local streets and propose mitigation strategies that would address these safety concerns, such as creating an alternative primary access to the proposed subdivision via extension of Dinehard Lane, or severely restricting the number of home sites that have traffic access through existing local streets. Thank you for your time.
And Marcia, thanks for the written comments too. That'll be really helpful. And that is the purpose of the environmental assessment.
It wasn't entirely clear, so that's why I just wanted to express my concerns, because I wasn't.
Oh, that's great, because that'll help us follow up and provide some direction on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is Sherry Sunfield.
Pronounce my name right. You're wonderful. Getting a lot of Cherise these days. I'm not really sure why. Anyway, thank you so much for the work that you guys do and for listening. It's hard, I know, sort of been there. My name is Sherry Sunfield and I live at 664 Woodlands Drive for 18 years. And I could totally concur with every single word that Marcia said, first of all. I'm here to comment on the same thing. And if passed, of course, the resolution would require an environmental assessment of the acreage, but we're not completely clear that it would include addressing these issues that Marcia has always talked about, which is why we're asking, please. And we're supporting the resolution, and many other people in the Woodlands do from our discussions, but we're asking that you approve it with the requirement that that assessment specifically consider all the potential options for vehicular traffic. It's just not clear to us. We tried, we talked to planning, we did our best. So thank you for understanding our limitations, I guess. This landlocked parcel with R4 zoning will add over 600 single-family lots, roughly, presenting issues for routine and emergency access as well as construction access. I'd like you to note these points that support specifically requiring this in your approval, or making sure that it does, but specifically requiring would be best. Thank you. The acreage is landlocked. It's surrounded by the Noakes property, the Woodlands, Fox Ridge, and West Place. Unless a major new access point and road network is established, existing roadways will be overwhelmed, thus creating safety hazards. There are many young children who use the Woodlands roads to walk to the nearby schools. And I'll come back to why I say that and support my statement. The Woodlands, 118 single-family lots plus Fox Ridge, 32, have 2 exits on Spring Mountain right now. The 158 acres, over 600 single-family lots, would go through Fox Ridge and the Woodlands and the existing neighborhoods to access Spring Mountain Ranch. So that's more than 750, roughly, single-family lots using 2 access points for Spring Mountain. So let's compare this to put it in perspective to Spring Mountain. Lip Creek to Bitterroot on the east side has 9 access points for 528 single-family lots. Woodlands Drive is only 23 feet wide at its widest points. I measured it. Cross section, this does not meet, and there's no shoulder and there's no separate path, period. This does not meet the cross section of a local street in the transportation master plan, much less a busier street. And in winter, the road is even more narrow and the snowbanks are so high that sight lines are obscured for safe exits. The comprehensive plan includes transportation goals and policies for safe streets. The assessment needs to recognize the acreage is landlocked and that insufficient access has been proposed in the preliminary plan concepts that we've been presented by the developer. The assessment needs to look at creating additional and practical access. Unless a major new access point and road network is established, existing roadways will be overwhelmed. Just look back at my figures, thus creating safety hazards. And we really appreciate your careful consideration. And I hear the beeps. How about that? We really do appreciate your thinking about this carefully. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And have you have anything in writing?
I did submit something very similar in writing, yes.
Great.
I
Thank you.
did.
That'll be really helpful to us.
Yeah, and I'm always available. You know where I am. We haven't had long conversations, but you know where to get me.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, it looks like our last speaker is Thadeus Hoffman.
Thank you. Just to orient the council, what we're talking about, I'm following Marcia and Sherry, is right here, 158 acres, just so we understand. I had an attachment with my written comments. But
And Thaddeus, before we start our timer, would you please state your name, and hopefully I pronounced it correctly, and then your address.
yeah, my name is Thadeus Hoffman, residing at 602 Woodlands Drive, McCall, Idaho.
Thank you.
I'm here this evening to ask the council to vote in favor of adopting Resolution 2125, designating certain properties as an area of critical concern. Specifically, I'm asking that the 158 acres to the northeast, east, and southeast of the Woodlands neighborhood be designated an area of critical concern. This includes approximately 68 acres, parcel number RPM 150605, located within the city limits, and approximately 90 acres, parcel number RP 18N03E 154641, located in Valley County, but within our city impact area. Our community was recently made aware of a planned development of these 2 parcels. This planned development appears to comprise 4 phases, which, if all 4 phases are completed, would add about 353 single-family zoned R4 lots plus medium density zone R8 housing. In addition, if the 90-acre parcel is annexed by the city, the completed development would add a subdivision comprising about 3% of McCall's current land area. The fact that Chapter 7, Section 9.7.08 of our city code provides the council with the ability to specify areas of critical concern speaks volumes about our citizens' respect for the unique environment we are surrounded by and our duty to ensure that any development is done with sensitivity to the unique animal life, plant life, wetlands, soils, scenic areas that make life in McCall distinct in Idaho. Designation of this property as an area of critical concern will ensure that any development is accomplished with full consideration of the environmental impacts due to increased traffic, noise, lighting, reduction of forests, loss of watershed, and proximity to the learning environments of our elementary and middle schools. I ask that with designation of this property as an area of critical concern, an environmental assessment be accomplished and reviewed by our city staff and consultants prior to approval of each phase of development of these sensitive 158 acres. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any written comments you wanted to leave with us?
You know, I had uploaded, I had an attachment, was unable to attach it, but it was basically reflecting where it was.
Thank you very much. So while I was listening and the rest of the council, were there any other information that we got from outside? Any other folks that would like to comment tonight?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for everyone's patience in making this a priority.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
So go forth and enjoy those good things you were talking about.
We'll be thinking about you.
But thank you for making it a priority to join us tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Should be hearing from all of you.
And maybe not my last time here. Thank you so much.
Can we get started? Mind if I use the restroom?
Yeah. We'll take a quick 2-minute break. Thanks. So while we're waiting, I have a question for Reagan. You're muted right now. Can you hear me? This is Mayor Bob.
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
So it's not a technical question. I just wanted to know, were you able to listen into our public comments? Were you able to hear that?
Yes, I was.
Good. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yep.
That'll be helpful when we get to the topic, so.
Has she been privileged to the written comment?
That would be a question for Bessie Jo.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. So Mike, when you stepped out, I just asked one procedural question of our guest from Fish and Game, Reagan. I asked her if she was able to hear all of the public comment tonight, and she said she was. She was tracking that well. And then Melanie asked, did Reagan receive any of the written comments? And Bessie Jo confirmed that that had occurred as well. All right, so we're back in session. Our first item is, after public comments, the work session. This is Agenda Bill 168, the request for council to review a draft ordinance regarding prohibiting the feeding of wildlife. And in our packet, it is listed as an action item. Justin's going to present. Reagan's going to provide some additional information. The council will then discuss a bunch of stuff and work through the ordinance, and we'll go from there and see where we end up. So, Justin, you are on. If you could unmute. Thank you.
Unmuted. Mayor Council, Justin Williams, Chief of Police, City of McCall. Before you today is the third touch and the proposed wildlife feeding ordinance, meaning prohibition of feeding wildlife within the city limits of McCall. This does not extend outside of the city limits of McCall. It does not extend anywhere other than within the city. You have been provided by Bill Nichols and our legal source of a draft of this particular ordinance and what it would look like. It's not so much a presentation from myself as I believe it's going to be a discussion with council. I'll be able to answer questions for you as you have them. I just ask that we stay focused on the fact that what we're looking at here is a wildlife feeding ordinance. Our ordinance does not pertain to the relocation, the eradication, or the euthanizing of any of the town deer or anything of that nature. That's something that would be handled by, if anything, and addressed by Fish and Game, the experts, the biological experts, the wildlife biologists, those people. So what we're looking at is simply the feeding of wildlife. I know that this has been a very hot topic within the community and from the looks of it across other places as well. And people have been very emotional about this topic. And some have been very heated and some have been taking it to almost an extreme in times and what's been being said about this. There's been a lot of disinformation that's been put out, a lot of erroneous information that's been put out, and I hope that council's able to filter through all of this and come to whatever decision it is that you choose. And so just be mindful of the fact that what it is that I'm proposing and that the city's proposing is a prohibition of wildlife feeding. Now, I'll pass it over to Regan. She and I had conversations earlier today, and she's going to address any issues that have to do with Fish and Game on that area. So, Regan.
Welcome, Regan. Thank you for joining us.
Before we get started, and I'm happy to answer questions like I have the last couple times, I just want to clear up a few things that I've been hearing both in public comments and just around town. The first is to reiterate what Justin said, which is that the ordinance you're considering and the Fish and Game trap and relocate effort are two separate things. The ordinance was proposed by McCall Police Department to alleviate safety concerns that are associated with a growing town deer herd. Any effort to trap and relocate deer, if the ordinance is passed, would happen because in our professional opinion, that would be the most humane and responsible reaction to a ban on feeding. The reason for that is because if the ordinance does pass and there is no effort to trap and relocate, most, if not all of the town deer will slowly die of starvation. The second issue I would like to bring up is that, yes, trapping and relocating is indeed stressful for deer. I have also reviewed a lot of research that has looked at dozens of studies throughout the United States where deer have been trapped and relocated. Overall, across those studies, it estimates about a 4% mortality rate during the trap and relocate effort. And there is an elevated mortality rate after deer are put on their new winter range as they adjust to their new surroundings. But it is important to realize that town deer already have a fairly high winter mortality rate right here and right now. Between Fish and Game and McCall PD, we probably responded to 40 or more injured or dead deer calls this past winter. If we estimate the town deer herd at about 150 to 200 animals, that's a mortality rate of 20 to 25% that occur each winter in town right now. The third thing I would like to mention is I keep hearing the word eradicate. And I want to stress that this effort will not eradicate all deer from McCall. One of Fish and Game's goals, and it's stated on our website, one of the commission's positions, is to keep big game populations maintained under natural conditions and using natural forage, basically to keep wild animals wild. Decades of winter feeding in McCall means that deer that once migrated to lower elevations in the winter don't do that anymore. Migration routes have been forgotten generations ago, and they don't know those migration patterns or routes anymore. Right now, if you take a trip just outside of McCall in the middle of winter, you don't currently see deer when you head up to the north end of Payette Lake or out to Little Lake. Those deer migrate in the winter, but they return in the summer. You do see deer in those places in the summertime when you go out to those places. And so the goal for deer that live closer into town in McCall is to do the same thing. Migrate like wild deer do in the winter, which means we would see many of them again in the summertime. And then the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys is that a number of public comments have urged you to focus on education and not regulation. And I absolutely agree with that, but I wanted to quickly give a rundown of the educational efforts we have undertaken to date. Over the past 3 years, we've published 8 or 9 articles in the Star News about this topic. We created, printed, and distributed brochures about the pitfalls of feeding wildlife to the tune of $10,000. Our staff has made 18 personal contacts with people who feed deer in town, asking them to please stop feeding and explaining the problems that come with feeding. We created a PSA about deer feeding that was on the local radio station, and we have put up signs in places in town when we have reports of aggressive deer coming after dogs and things like that in early summer when fawns are small. So we have definitely made a hearty effort at education, and we'll continue to do so regardless of what happens with the council's decision on the ordinance, because that is a huge component of what we do here at Fish and Game with all species. You'll notice we do the same thing with bears, that you'll see a lot of articles about that. So those are the things I wanted to cover just at the beginning, because they're things I've heard, common themes that have been coming up. And with that, we can take questions if needed.
Thank you, Regan. And one thing, just to partner in the education aspect, I know that many of the comments and many of the requests have been education efforts. The education efforts have been there by Fish and Game, they've been there from the city as well. And we stop and think about the signs and educating people and doing things. And yet in the same breath, many people equate, speeding as an issue and putting up signs. And yet speeding is still the #1 complaint within the city. Signs do nothing without an enforcement action that is available to that. It's simply a recommendation if it's not enforceable. And so that's what we're looking at with the wildlife feeding ordinance, is to make it enforceable, to have some sort of mechanism to hold people accountable for it. So just a little more explanation on that. So with that, you have copies of the draft in front of you, and I'll open up for questions or comments should you have them.
Thank you both. Really appreciate it. So the next step is we have in our packet the ordinance. We have exhibits A and B, which go along with the ordinance, and then we have a summary of the ordinance. So it's a very thorough packet, well put together. Before we start diving into that as a group, as council, are there any quick questions for either Justin or Regan? All right, so our next task is to have each of us talk about what's in our packet, the ordinance, because the goal, as stated in the agenda bill, is to review this ordinance on all the supporting material and either ask staff to finalize for adoption at the next council meeting, or to make changes that could be brought back to us. That's the goal stated in the objective stated in the agenda bill. So Mike, let me start with you. What do you think about what's in the packet and the wording in the ordinance and the exhibits A and B? Are you comfortable with that material?
I am.
Okay. Colby?
Yeah, I think it's as far as the ordinance goes, it's all there, and I will avoid opening the can of worms of taking the trapping aspect out of the ordinance. The number 7, exhibit B and B7, persons who are engaged in lawful trapping activity. Personally, I think that causes some problems, but that's not the discussion. So that's it.
Okay. Melanie, let me skip over to you. Start at the end of the table there. What's your thoughts?
My thoughts are that we should table this completely. Our community does not want this because of what shitstorm will go after it. And I'll be clear, it's going to be a shitstorm. And so, no, we should not be talking about this right now.
Okay. Cami?
I think that the ordinance deals with the whole thing we were talking about is the feeding of the animals, and I think that it looks great.
Okay. Regan, can you still hear us? I have a question for you and Justin.
Yes, I can still hear you.
And Justin, if you could unmute.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I heard tonight, public testimony, was about surrounding states. And I had taken notes from a couple weeks ago, I guess it was. I believe in the state of Montana, they have a statewide order. Is that correct? Could you Can
Yes.
one of you tell me a little bit about it? Like, does it include animals like deer?
Yes, it does. It's a statewide prohibition from feeding wildlife.
And then you listed a bunch of communities, specific cities in Colorado, I believe, and some other states.
And then near Coeur d'Alene as well.
Okay. And Pocatello, is that also
Yes.
on the list? All right. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I was remembering that right.
Yes, sir.
You could add all national parks as well.
Okay.
It's pretty clear, like if you're in a national park, there's signs everywhere that says don't feed the wildlife and here's why.
Yes.
Parks.
How about Riggins? Since there was apparently a,
So there's a question about Riggins. What,
does Riggins have a
is there any,
feeding ordinance that since they,
I do not believe Riggins has a feeding ordinance.
okay. All right, so looking at my script that Bessie Jo helped me with, doesn't sound like we have any edits. So,
Yeah, make sure that they're good with the way the ordinance is written. If there's anything we want
so
to change.
the debate is only whether or not we want to have an ordinance. So, all right. The last thing I am to do, and we are to do as a council, is summarize direction to staff. So, listening to each of you, I'm thinking that we would ask staff to go back to the front page here. We would direct staff to finalize this action, this ordinance, excuse me, this wildlife, the prohibition of feeding of wildlife, this draft ordinance, to finalize it for consideration and adoption at our next council meeting. And we are not in total agreement. I did, I'm listening to all of you. I know that Melanie does not agree with this, but it sounds like the four of us are in agreement. And I think we talked about the trapping. You warned us about the legal ramifications of trying to ban trapping within the city, right? We've discussed that.
Well, Mr. Mayor, what I said was the issue is, I mean, you can look into that aspect of it. I think the issue of banning fur-bearing trapping and such, you would, first of all, how much of it happens? Where does it happen? Within the city limits? Is it just along the river? Is it there? I mean, I think you'd want to find out that, but I think if you go into banning trapping, licensed fur-bearing trapping as a permitted activity, it may be within your purview to do it. But I think that's a separate issue apart from whether or not you should allow feeding of wildlife. And so don't mix the two issues, tackle them separately would be really my advice.
that's what I was trying to say. That's the one thing I disagree with in this, but it's not what we're discussing.
Yeah, no, thank you both for clarifying that. I wanted to make sure I was tracking that correctly.
And lawyers shouldn't make policy. That's your job to make policy. And so it's within your purview. If you say that's what you want us to look into, we'll see if you can do it. But I wouldn't mix the two together.
Yeah, no, I think we recognize that. I really do. Justin, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
I was going to reiterate as well that I'm in agreement with what Bill just said and what Colby said. That's a separate issue. If that's something that you would like for code to look at, we absolutely could look at that, keep that separate from this. It's very similar to what we had done with Fish and Game as far as making it a prohibition of firing firearms within the city limits, bows and arrows and things of that nature, because we had run into the issue with people harvesting deer within the city limits and having nothing to charge them with. So that was the way that we went about that. So if that's something that council chooses, absolutely, we could look at doing that later.
All right, thank you. So question for Bessie Jo, procedural question. The recommended action, I've stated that a couple of times. Do we need it's direction to staff. Do we need any kind of a vote tonight or just summarize direction?
Just summarize direction. So my understanding is that you would want to remove that number 7 from the ordinance altogether.
No.
No, not at this time.
Not at this time.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
it's
just leave it as it is.
So I was gonna state that, but I just wanted to make sure, does someone need to make a motion?
We just need to
Okay,
just,
so let me take a shot at this and then I'll ask you if we captured this right.
yeah.
Okay. So we've reviewed the draft ordinance and the council, 4 of us on the council would like to direct staff to finalize for adoption at the next council meeting, the ordinance and the language in Appendix A and B and the summary of the ordinance. And we did not have any edits. That's what I captured. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
could I ask one more question since we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here. I guess, Regan, in relation to Fish and Game's plan for trapping and relocating deer, is Fish and Game planning on doing this regardless of whether or not this ordinance is passed?
No, as someone actually stated earlier, it's actually a pretty expensive and time-consuming effort to trap and relocate deer. That's not something that we would want to commit to doing if there was no feeding ordinance, because it would just be, there would be no end to that process. If people were continuing to feed deer in town would continue to breed and have fawns and come into town and find food and that sort of thing. And so we'd probably end up back with this many deer in town years from now, having spent all that time and money trapping. So no, we would not plan to trap and relocate deer without a feeding ordinance.
And on the other side of that is, if this ordinance passes, is there a way for the city to request that Fish and Game does not pursue trapping and relocating deer? Despite what
I guess my question would be, what would the alternative be? I mean, if we did not trap and relocate deer, I guess, from my professional opinion, that is the more humane option, because otherwise the deer will have nothing to eat and a lot of deep snow, and will die of starvation. So I guess that would be my question, is what would be the alternative?
But I guess my question is there a mechanism for the city to request Fish and Game to not carry out this trapping and relocation should the ordinance pass and that were to be an option on the table? Just for clarity, I'm just curious about this.
I guess anything's an option, but I think, and I'd like to hear from all of you that if there was a vote, you voted for this ordinance. My assumption is that based on Regan's continued briefing on this issue, that the more humane treatment would be to not have them starve, but to try to relocate them. And so my assumption as a member of the council is that if we pass an ordinance at our next meeting or whatever that bans feeding, that we would expect Fish and Game to carry out, their trapping and relocation.
Sure, I understand that, but is there the ability to not have that be the outcome if we passed an ordinance where I mean, it seems like we're in general agreement that the feeding ordinance is appropriate. I think it's the actions of Fish and Game that is where the vast majority of our community really is having a problem with. I mean, I'm taking out my opinion on, you know, on what would likely happen if we passed a feeding ordinance and then didn't have the trapping and relocation aspect of it. I'm asking simply is it a possibility for those two to be separate?
Colby, can I interject on this, please? I think I might be able to provide some clarity because I get what you're saying. Yes, I believe there would be a mechanism that the council could ask for that, but it rolls back to the fact that this is not set in stone as far as what Fish and Game's doing. Regan and I had this conversation earlier. There is no plan that is implemented and in place right now on the day that this passes that this is what Fish and Game is going to do. They still have to conduct the appropriate research and look at the herds and see what's actually going on. They have to physically get hands on some of these animals and things to see what it is that the long-term plan is going to be. And so while, yes, I believe that the council could make a recommendation or make a request, ultimately it falls back to the biologists, Fish and Game. They are responsible for herd management within the state of Idaho. They are responsible for game management within the state of Idaho. And that decision as to what happens with the wild game in the state of Idaho falls at their feet, not at ours.
Well, and I would summarize it this way. I think some of us feel this way. If we pass an ordinance to prohibit feeding, we should expect that there's going to be some actions taken by Fish and Game. And I think it would, I don't think, speaking for myself, I would not vote for an ordinance to ban feeding if I knew that we were going to also ask Fish and Game to not relocate or take humane actions. That's not in my moral code of ethics. So I don't want to build an expectation that, yes, if we vote for this ordinance that, and I'm just speaking for myself, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the people around the table, the rest of the council members. That's my thoughts. Mike, what's your thoughts? Do you want to explore having a separate, I don't know whether it's a resolution telling Fish and Game that we don't want them to trap? You know, after we pass an ordinance?
I'm not going to speak for Fish and Game.
Okay.
We're just talking about people feeding the wildlife in city limits.
Correct.
So Fish and Game, how they manage things and their level of expertise, I'm not in a place to question their biologists and what they do in managing wild animals in the state of Idaho. So I'm not really, I understand people's concerns and I hear everything that everybody in our community has said and passionately said and so on and so forth, but we're just talking about banning, having enforcement for those that continue to feed wildlife.
Right. Any other thoughts you had,
I'm
Kim?
in complete agreement with what Mike said.
And I'm in complete disagreement with both of you because we have been hired to listen to our community and our community does not want us to perpetrate this action. And I had a conversation with Regan yesterday and she pretty much told me that that's where they were going. Regardless, if we make this ordinance happen, this is where it's going. And we are the ones that are perpetrating that. So think about that for a second, because forgive my armchair quarterback status, but we don't know for a fact that these deer will just die off. I don't agree with that for a second. Excuse my passion, but this is wrong.
That's all fine. I don't know what the Fish and Game's plan and what their process is as far as studying this, looking at this, and at what point in time. I do know that from what our experience is with Regan is that as far as us being involved and having some ability to to speak on behalf of the community, that channel of communication clearly is open.
Right.
So I don't feel like something is going on, like there could be other things going on that are issues within our community that we don't have say in. For instance, something between the land board and another private entity that we don't have say. Here, it's been very clear that at least our input as a community is valued, even though it's more on the
Even though we're not listening to it.
emotional side or what have you, as far as that. So I don't hear that there's any clear, that at this point in time, that they have a clear path of that seems to be the case. So that's all I'm referring to.
All right. Well, I think we've met the objective of addressing the agenda bill as it was structured. So I'm going to suggest we move on to the next item.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for the information.
Thank you, council. We'll move forward. Thanks, Regan.
Thank you, Jensen.
All right, our next item is, so that's the work session, business agenda, Agenda Bill 21-164. I believe we have a guest speaker, David Holland. Dave Holland's going to talk to us about the Woodstock agreement, which Heartland Hunger Resource Center has been involved in, and this is July 10th. Welcome, David. Good to see you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm a technically challenged person, so you'll have to forgive me. My name's Dave Holland. I live at 616 North 3rd Street in McCall, Idaho. I'm on the executive board for Heartland Hunger and Resource Center, and it's we're commonly known as a food bank group, you know. This is an annual event that's been going on now for 11 or 12 years, and we have been in partnership with the city, and I'm just here to just thank you people on behalf of those who can't thank you themselves. In our economic environment, we've got a lot of people in need, you know, are exiting our community, and they need all the help they can get. This is just a little way we can come together and provide a little bit of assistance. Now, over the years, we've provided over 1,000 cords of split, cut, and delivered wood to folks at free of charge. And I've personally been on some of those deliveries, and I'm telling you, it's extremely humbling, you know, and an honor to be part of the effort. And, you know, it's, if you ever want to have a wonderful experience and see the goodness of our community, come in and be part of that on that Saturday and see the best of our society. It's a sweet experience, to be real honest with you. And it's people from every walk of life coming together. There's some very affluent people there and not so affluent. And anyway, I just want to thank you on behalf of all those people. You know, it's a hot day when that wood gets cut and split and delivered. But there's a lot of cold days in the winter when a lot of those folks are putting that wood in their hearth, you know, to provide heat. A lot of them are in mobile homes, and you know, the heat goes right out, you know, and they just got to keep that fire burning to stay warm. And in January, February, March, those prayers go out of thanksgiving to you for that. So,
well, Dave, we appreciate all you've done over the years, and thanks thanks. I mean, for doing that. It makes a difference in our community. Most of us are real familiar with the program and it's great. We have in our packet the Workday 2021 proclamation, which I'll be glad to sign if council asks me to do that. And we have an agreement that looks like it's well worded. I'm going to ask the group if there's any questions on that agreement. But our intent is to continue to be a full partner with you. And again, thank you for your leadership and doing this. Council, any thoughts or comments about the agreement or the proclamation? We good to go with that?
Good to go. Appreciate everything Dave's doing.
Well, I would like to not take credit for all of it.
I know you have a lot of good people helping you. And I think in some years we've had some faith-based groups provide like parking lot area to do the firewood. Is that the same situation this year?
Yeah, whatever they needed, they always step forward with whatever we request, which has been so kind, but yes.
Well, good. We'll make sure that the agreement gets signed, executed, and implemented, and we wish you well, and hopefully some of us can come out and join you on July 10th to look at and see how things are going.
Oh, we'd love to have every one of you come. We'd love Bessie Joe to come and all of you. Sometimes we think, well, I can't do that heavy lifting and stuff, but just handing out water bottles helps, and we have, but you need to come, please come. Just even for a half an hour, it'd be really wonderful. But thank you so very, very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, our next item is.
So we need to make
We need a motion to accept that.
I'll
Thank
make a
you.
motion to approve the Woodstock agreement with Heartland Hunger and Resource Center and proclaim the 10th day of July 2021 to be Humanitarian Woodwork Day in the city of McCall and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you, Cammie, for remembering that, and thanks, Colby, for the second. Motion has been made and seconded. Approve the Woodstock agreement with Heartland Hunger and Resource Center. Proclaim the 10th day of July 2021 to be Humanitarian Woodwork Day in the city of McCall and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote on that, please?
Councilmember Callan?
Yes.
Councilmember Nielsen?
Yes.
Mayor Giles?
Yes.
Councilmember Holmes?
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik?
Yes.
All right, that motion carries. Next up, Agenda Bill 21-169, request to approve National Endowment for the Arts grants. This is for arts projects, an application for the McCall Library Public Art. And Delta, you are joining us you're going to present this, correct?
I am Mayor Council. I'm Delta James Economic Development Planner. This is a request for approval to submit a grant to the National Endowment for the Arts under their Grants for Arts Projects program for an amount up to $25,000 to support a public art project to be integrated within the upcoming library expansion project. You might remember that the public art for the library was one of the priority projects articulated within the McCall Public Art Plan that was adopted in March of this year. An integrated public art project, if we can get an artist on board early, will allow for the artwork to serve a critical function within the building project itself. For example, it might be an interior doorway or flooring or furnishings or a front desk, as well as being a beautiful object. And so really quickly, I'd love to be able to share with you just a couple of examples of integrated public artwork within libraries, just hopefully. Are you able to see the Wind in the Willows?
Yes.
Public art project? Okay.
Yep.
So this is integrated public artwork that actually creates windows within the library at the Willow Glen Branch Library in San Jose. And so an artist created these window elements that are part of the structure itself. This next one, if you're seeing it, is the Sea of Knowledge. This is an interior light window for meeting spaces within the North Village Branch Library in Austin, Texas, and it's also a public artwork. And then this one's my favorite. This is a piece in the Seattle Public Library. It's actually flooring, where they have etched in first sentences from 1,543 books in their collection in 11 languages. So it serves as flooring, but also is this very relevant, interesting bit of artwork for the Seattle Library. Here in Idaho, there's been some also functional pieces with libraries. This is these are bike racks outside of the Coeur d'Alene Public Library that was done through Public Art Project. In Eagle, there's a fencing around the children's garden that was also a public art project. So those are just a couple of examples of public art that is integrated within a project. And that's the kind of thing that we're hoping to do with the McCall Public Library expansion project. The Public Art Advisory Committee reviewed the project and approved it earlier this year as part of the public art planning, but we also presented to the McCall Library Board, who also expressed their support for the project. So the grant funding, if awarded, would go to a public art project within the McCall Public Library, an integrated piece. The grant does require local funding match. And so the funds necessary to match this grant are actually pending the FY22 city budget approval. A CIP request of $62,000 has been submitted for your consideration, which when added to the grant, if it's awarded, would bring the project estimate cost up to $87,000 total and would allow us to do something relatively significant and beautiful for the library.
Any questions for Delta? All right, the recommended action is to approve submittal. Would someone make a motion to approve submittal of an NEA grant?
I'll make a motion to approve submittal of an NEA grant application for the McCall Library of Public Art and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded to approve submittal of a NEA grant application for McCall Library Public Art and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Machesik?
Yes.
Councilmember Cowan?
Yes.
Mayor Giles?
Yes.
Councilmember Holmes?
Yes.
Councilmember Nielsen?
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, Delta, we're on to your next art topic, Agenda Bill 21-171, a request to approve artist personal property lease agreement.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Yes, this is, so years ago, the McCall Arts and Humanities Council actually launched a loaner art program. That was in 2008. And at the time, the city didn't have a formalized public art program, but it did partner with the McCall Arts and Humanities Council to provide sculptures around town for public display, and the city entered into lease agreements with a handful of artists for those works. All of those works, except for one, has now either been brought permanently into our collection as a gift and is part of the city's public art collection, or the artists have removed them. There is one piece left that's called Going to School that lives in Brown Park and has been there since 2010. It was moved from another location where it got hit by a car, but Anyway, it's been in Brown Park since 2010. It's by an artist named Phil Wilkham. He is a metalwork artist. The piece itself, you may have seen, is a circular piece about 5 feet tall that has a school of fish that is in profile as part of the artwork in Brown Park. The Brown Park restoration and expansion project that's currently happening accommodates for that public art piece to continue to be on display in Brown Park. Sadly, Phil Wilkham, the artist, passed away due to complications from COVID about a year ago. His family would like to continue to lease the artwork to the city of McCall for at least a period of 5 years to just keep it on display. They're not quite ready to part with it in a donation, but they love having it here. And the artist, Phil Wilkham, has a relationship with McCall in that he has been coming up here for decade with his family, but he also did the snowflakes in metal that are on the side of the Ice and Event Center. So there's a couple of pieces of his that we have here in McCall. So this is a request to continue the artist's personal property lease agreement with Phil Wilkham's family for the lease or loan of the public artwork going to school for a period of 5 years, terminating June 30th. 2026, and the artwork will be placed back in Brown Park as soon as the grading and improvements are complete.
Great. Good work on this. Thanks for making our packet really complete. Any questions for Delta? Seems really straightforward. May I have a motion to approve this?
Approve artist personal property lease agreement for going to school public artwork and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you both. Motion has been made and seconded to approve artist personal property lease agreement for going to school, public artwork, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Machesik?
Yes.
Councilmember Nielsen?
Yes.
Councilmember Callan?
Yes.
Mayor Giles?
Yes.
Councilmember Holmes?
Yes.
Motion carries. We are on to Agenda Bill 21-172, and I'm not sure who's helping on this one. This is either Kurt or Tara. Is Tara on? Go ahead.
Council, this is Tara Woods, Recreation Supervisor. There I am.
Hi, Tara. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. Let me get my stuff up so I know what I'm talking about. All right. So city ordinance number 745 in October of 2020, section 4D, stated that volunteers who were head coaches or instructors of classes would receive 50% discount from their child's, his or her child's fee. And as anybody who works with volunteers know, it's really hard to round up volunteers. And I propose that any head coach would receive one free 100% discount for his or her child in that program. I ran this by the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and everybody unanimously agreed that it would really help ease our recruiting efforts to give a bigger carrot, so to speak. And as well as looking at some of the same ordinance, just updating some of the language. It's been quite some time. Some of the, gosh, where is it? Sorry, I'm scrolling here too. Some of the language was, turning in applications to the finance director before we had a chance to look at it, whether it was for refunds or for scholarships. And it's something that we like to keep track of too. So forms would be turned in to myself or someone in the department before we then hand it over to finance, as well as scholarship applications. Instead of sending more paperwork Annette's way, we thought that we could just keep it within the department to issue scholarships and discounts for programs.
Thank you, Tara. So the recommended action is to approve this resolution. I see on our agenda, Bill, Parks and Rec is the originator, treasurer is supportive of this. And Bill, you don't have any legal concerns on this, do you?
No.
Okay, so it's within our purview. Council, how you feel about this? Good idea? Will someone please make a motion then?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 21-24, adopting definition of terms used when setting recreation fees, ratifying the calculations to set fees charged for services of the Recreation Department, establishing a refund policy, establishing a scholarship and discount policy, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you. Motion has been made, seconded. Approve Resolution 21-24, adopting definition of terms used when setting recreation fees, ratifying the calculations to set fees charged for the services of the Recreation Department, establishing a refund policy, establishing a scholarship and discount policy, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cowan?
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik?
Yes.
Mayor Giles?
Yes.
Councilmember Holmes?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
All right, that motion carries.
All right. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for joining us, Tara, and thanks for your good work on pulling that together.
Absolutely.
All right, we're on to areas of critical concern, Agenda Bill 21-173. This is a request to adopt Resolution 21-25. And we heard and have received written comments on this issue. So who's leading us through this one? Let's see.
We're waiting. You mind if I use the bathroom again, Bob?
No, let's take a 2-minute break, and my notes say either Michelle or Diane or both will present. So who's helping out on this tonight?
It's Diane, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see your initials up there. Thank you, Diane. We're on a 2-minute break for all of us are well hydrated, so hang in there and we'll be back on in 2 minutes. Diane, were you able to hear the public testimony tonight?
Mayor, I just got into town and I just heard the tail end of the last presenter.
Okay. The good news is it sounds like we have, well, of course we'll have a good record of it recorded, but we also, I believe our first speaker, Marcia Whitty, for example, had very detailed written comments. So that will be helpful in the record as well as we proceed. And we'll talk about that when we finish recess here. So Mike, while you were out, I just asked Diane if she could hear the public, comments, and she was not able to hear all of them because she just got back into town. She only heard the last person, so. All right, we're back in session. Diane, all of council members around the table, I'm gonna let you present, but before we do that, let me just review that we did have public comment tonight. It was very meaningful, very helpful to all of us on this particular property area of critical concern. And the good news is we have some of these comments in writing that will help, that would be helpful to you and other staff members and to council as we go forward. So with that background, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As you heard, there is a proposed development just east of the city, with just adjacent to Fox Ridge, West Place, and Woodlands. It includes 2 parcels for a total of around 158 acres in size. The applicant or the property owner's representative approached the city in April with their intention for development. And I want to emphasize that at this point, the city has not received any formal development application. We've had a number of conversations with the applicant, and different representatives from the city have met with different representatives from the applicant, as well as they have met with the neighborhood, including neighborhood representatives. The good news is that you have some special provisions in the subdivision code which acknowledges that you will receive applications that are large, they have some sensitive lands, they're adjacent to existing neighborhoods, they present some challenges for development because of their location, access, and etc. And the special development provisions in the subdivision code allows you by resolution, which is what we're presenting you tonight, to identify these areas of critical concern. And this enables us to require that prior to an application review, that there be an environmental assessment, which is a land analysis looking both at the natural conditions on the site as well as the built environment. What's the context in which this development will occur? And there's several advantages of this approach. One being that it allows for a holistic perspective of this property, and given its size, that's a real benefit. It allows everybody to sort of be on the same page of information. And as you know, these kinds of applications require review by a number of different, both city and other agencies. So it allows everybody to be playing from the same page of information and helps us to better coordinate a big project like this when we have this sort of data that ties us all together. And I think mostly importantly about going this process is that it allows for an analysis to be completed of sort of the opportunities for development on the site as well as the constraints. And that helps maybe to dictate what the land carrying capacity is, what the public utility service capacity is, and starts to frame the design of this project, both in terms of its location and its intensity of use. So it's a good way to approach large-scale developments like this. So that's the rationale for our recommendation. The applicant, we've had discussions with them and their representative. They're in the process of putting an environmental team together. And so if you pass this resolution, our first step would be to have a scoping meeting with them where we share all of our concerns, what we feel needs to be addressed in this analysis, including those that you received tonight from the neighbors and from other agencies as well. So we're asking you to approve this resolution 2125.
So Diane, I think you already answered one of the questions we had. We had 3 people talk to us tonight. Very well thought out public comments, well organized. Each of them had 3 minutes. Some of them submitted written comments. And they have an expectation, they're in support of this environmental analysis, and they had an expectation, and we're hoping that we, the city, and our and the contractor that's doing this work could make sure that those concerns are captured and addressed during the environmental analysis. And it sounds like you know how to do that and capture that. And that's a reasonable expectation, at least that those things get looked at during the environmental analysis. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, and that's certainly our intent.
Great. That's really encouraging. Council, any questions for Diane on this resolution to designate area critical concern?
I don't know if this would be directed directly to Diane or not, but the concern about the vehicle access, you know, is definitely something to look at, because those two, like they said, the Woodlands Road is so narrow, and so if it's possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that stuff's going to be captured. You know, what comes out of that, who knows, but at least it's being looked at. That's my expectation.
Would it be looked at in the
environmental analysis?
Okay.
The Woodlands Road, I wrote down Fox Ridge, any of the existing roads, and that was captured in the verbal comments that we heard tonight, and I believe Marcia captured that in her written comments. So.
Yeah, and if we're clear, they have not submitted a land use application at this point in time. So part of the process for the land use application is that all the different departments need to look at all those different items, as well as sewer capacity, you know, everything. And one comment that one of the folks that spoke said that the whole thing was R4, and according to our GIS, there's a portion that's currently zoned R4 in city limits, and there's another portion that is in the impact area that is RR zoning.
Right.
So there's nothing that guarantees that the developer can have the whole thing as R4 anyways. Right. Sewer capacity, you know, all the other issues, and water and infrastructure, what other requirements go. So this is a big one.
Yeah.
And they're gonna have a lot of work to get there.
Right, and it seems like this is great that we have it in our existing process. You know, to have stuff like this to help guide it and make it meaningful and a good plan to get started with.
And seemingly from the comments that I read, that the developer is on board with this.
That's the impression, yeah. Which is good.
That they've already started to hire.
Diane, I have a question. I don't know if I'd missed this or not, but I know the scope of work hasn't been determined yet on what they're assessing, but how broad of scope do you anticipate? I mean, is it to go out to the citywide services such as, you know, police, hospital, school, et cetera?
Yes, it would look both at the natural conditions on the site. You know, what are the, are there some significant environmental features that should be preserved? I know that there's some drainage areas that go through the site. How could they be best be preserved and treated? It'll look certainly at, you know, what are the access points and what are the potential impacts in terms of access? What are some of the opportunities maybe for improving access? And then it'll look certainly at public utilities. That's always a big determining factor when you're looking at subdivisions and rezone, is what is the ability of the city and other agencies to service that site.
So utilities excluding emergency services, schools, et cetera?
No, absolutely not. It would include all of those, all public services, safety, public safety, schools, utilities, roads, all of that.
Snow removal?
Probably, I'm sure Public Works will be interested in snow removal.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Diane, in your meetings with the developers' representatives, are the quality of the consultants up to the task?
No, I haven't met with all of them as yet. I've had some inquiries from some consultants who I'm not sure have been hired or not. So that is one of the first steps for us to put that team together and look at a scope and make sure they have the capabilities that the scope requires. One of the things that I think gets missed is we tend to take a piece of land and say, okay, how can we engineer this to meet our expectations for a certain development? And the land analysis, the site designers get sort of set aside in that process. So I think one of our motivations is to make sure that they have a good site designer, not just an engineer who can survey and lay out roads and streets and utilities, but who's someone who really looks at the landform and the drainage systems and has that influence the locations and style of development.
Well, the reason I ask is, as you're painfully aware, not all planners and not all engineers are equal. And so to the extent that the property owner and their representatives hire good folks, it'll make the process a lot better at the other end.
Absolutely.
So to the extent that you can influence them to hire good folks versus not so good folks, that would be great.
Okay. We'll work on it.
And Diane, it sounds like all the things that each of us brought up, it sounds like you're tracking all of that, which is really encouraging. So, all right, the recommended action is to adopt Resolution 21-25, designating certain properties owned by Pine Creek Ranch LLC as an area of critical concern.
I had one more question, sorry to interrupt the thing. Diane, as far as, I know that this is still out in the future, but how does local housing play into this assessment?
Well, I think the fortunate thing is that the property, as Councilman Machesik mentioned, requires rezoning, at least a portion of it. And Bill can advise you better than I, but that's the level where you have the greatest amount of discretion in approving or not approving a rezone. And in that decision, you're going to be looking at all your public objectives. Certainly local housing is one of those. So it's a great opportunity at that point to address that issue.
Gotcha, but that's exclusive of this assessment. That's not being assessed as far as to the community.
Yeah, no, housing's part of the built environment. So, we'd be looking at, what is both in terms of adjacent housing pattern, land development pattern, but what is the housing needs within the community? And that certainly has an influence on the level of development that they propose and the type of development, style, those kinds of things.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
That makes sense?
Yep, just wanted to.
Okay, thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
Are we ready for a motion? Council?
So make a motion to adopt Resolution 21-25 designating certain properties owned by Pine Creek Ranch LLC as an area of critical concern and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded to adopt Resolution 21-25, designating certain properties owned by Pine Creek Ranch LLC as an area of critical concern and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Machesik?
Yes.
Councilmember Cowan? Yes. Mayor Giles?
Yes.
Councilmember Holmes? Yes. Councilmember Nielsen?
Yes.
That motion carries, and we are on to the COVID-19 update and review of the mask metric status. So Justin and Annette.
Good evening. Again, Mayor and Council, Justin Williams, Chief of Police, here with the bi-weekly COVID-19 update. So as you're aware, we have the metrics that are in place, and we had agreed earlier, council had spotlighted that there needed to be 3 of the 4 metrics met. And so as of this moment, we are actually meeting 3 of the 4. Total vaccination for 12 and older in Valley County, the goal was 65%. At the moment, we're at 55.73%. Total vaccination in the Central District was for 65 and older. The goal was 75%. We are at 81.0% at the moment. Biweekly infection rate needed to be less than 5% for 4 weeks. Currently, we sit right at 5%. For this last week ending, we had spiked up to 6.9%. And if you look at last year, the data line and the spike that comes after Memorial Day weekend, in the weeks that are followed, there is an upshoot in that. But the previous week, we were at 3.1%. The week before that, we were at 4.4. The week before that at 5.6. And so if you average all that out, we are at exactly 5%. So we meet that metric. The percent of positivity rate, less than 5%. And we sit at 3.75% for the month. 1.1% for the last 2 weeks. 3.4%, 4.5, 5.3. So for the month, we're at 3.75. So we've met that metric as well. Questions?
Questions for Justin or?
Nope.
Annette, anything you'd like to add?
I don't have anything new.
Okay. Thank you, Justin.
Yes, sir. Thank you, council.
All right. Linda's going to present on Agenda Bill 21-175. This is their request approval of agreement to the U.S. Department of Treasury, the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund award terms and conditions. And this is an action item. We added this to the agenda June 22nd.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The state received funds for the non-entitlement units, which they will pass through. They have 30 days to pass those through to non-entitlement units, of which the city of McCall is one. We have a population of less than 50,000. We are on tap to receive up to 75% of our O&M budget, operations and maintenance budget. And in order to request funding, there are some documents that are required to be uploaded at the same time. So one of which is the approval of the award. Hold just a second. Let me get to the right page. Awards and conditions of the grant, certification of Title VI compliance, and then a certified budget, O&M budget for the city. So the ARPA funds, the American Recovery Relief Plan Act, is different from the CRF, the funds that we were awarded and received last year, in that the city of McCall will be directly the recipient. It's not a pass, it's a pass through, but we would be classified as recipient, and as such there are certain conditions that we need to be able to abide by. We would be reporting annually to the Treasury on our use of funds. So currently 50% of the funds will be made available to the non-entitlement units once we have submitted requests for funding, and then the remainder will be available 18 months later. So what's before you tonight is a request to authorize the mayor to sign the award and conditions certification to allow me to submit those funds, to submit for funds, and so that they can release those funds to the city.
Questions for Linda?
Mayor, I can add a little more information too. So these funds, as Linda was saying, is different than the CARES Act. So that one had a really short deadline that we could spend the money. And the state created a lot of very specific parameters for that. And that was when we opted into the Property Tax Relief Act and all of that. Under this new federal program, they're giving cities until 2026,
I think.
2026 to spend the money. So we have a lot of time to be strategic and think about what's the best way to invest this money in the McCall community. So right now, the state has a deadline that the cities have to meet in order to release the funds to us and meet the federal guidelines. So that's why we need this now. But they'll put the money into our local government investment pool account, and then we can take time with you through whatever work sessions to think about how you want to utilize those funds under the broad categories they've been designated for. So just because we're asking for it now doesn't mean we're spending it today. It's just to get the money in the bank and then take the time with you all on what we want to prioritize it for. So we'll have further discussions with you, but right now it's just to receive it and put it in our savings account, so to speak. So you may have read in the paper or heard on the news, this is the money that's available for water, sewer, broadband, costs associated with responding to the pandemic, relief assistance as a result of the pandemic, if there was something in the community that needed help. But it all has to eventually tie back to the pandemic in some way. So everyone across the country is researching and asking tons of questions of the U.S. Treasury Department right now on what's an eligible expense. So as we learn more, then we'll bring it forward to you and get your thoughts on how best to invest it here.
And the need for submitting the request for funds as soon as possible is that the state received the funds 30 days ago. They have 30 days to distribute the funds to the non-entitlement units, and they have asked for an extension. And so, according to the state controller's office, we should get our request in as soon as possible so that they can meet their due diligence and get the funds submitted to all the non-entitlement units of government.
What's the state been doing for 30 days? Why are we just here?
They've been waiting for guidance, FAQs, and from the Treasury, asking questions of Treasury, and so that they can find out what they need to do and to be in compliance with these funds, and just working through all of that. As far as that's what my understanding is.
So Linda, in my packet, this was added. I don't have it in my packet. It's in the digital packet. Can you put it on the screen what the recommended action is? A motion? Do you have it?
Yeah.
Can you share your screen with us? And
I do.
It's right here, if you want to read it.
Thank you.
Do you have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, are we good to go with this, or do you want more discussion, Council?
Good.
Okay, so the recommended actions: approve agreement to U.S. Department of the Treasury, and it's listed there in the digital packet. Would someone make that motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve agreement to U.S. Department of Treasury Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund Award, terms and conditions, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents.
Second.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Colby. And thanks for letting me read off your computer. So a motion has been made and seconded to approve agreement to U.S. Department of the Treasury Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund Award, terms and conditions, and authorize the mayor to sign all necessary documents. May I have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Holmes?
Yes.
Councilmember Nielsen?
Yes.
Councilmember Callan?
Yes.
Mayor Giles?
Yes.
Councilmember Machesik?
Yes.
That motion carries. Thanks for presenting that, Linda.
Thank you.
All right, before we get into upcoming meeting schedule, we are going to have a vacancy soon. City council, and so we're going to have a discussion tonight on, and then provide direction to staff on what to do about that. And Bessie Jo, you were going to lead us through that?
Yes. So in your packet, you have the reference to the governance manual on the process to fill an open position. And so that, if you all remember, you all revisited that and adopted this process. So what I'm looking for from you is a date of which you would like to have the applications due by, as well as when you would like to hold those interviews. So that when we place an ad, we can put that all in the ad. So looking at your upcoming meeting schedule, let me pull that up.
So Melanie, your last date on council will be the 12th, is that right, of August?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have the August 5th tentative special session that you could conduct those interviews at if you would like. And then you could, on August 12th at the end of the meeting, recess into the committee of the whole and have your discussion on the applicants, and then come back as the council and make an appointment, and then we could swear that person in the following meeting on August 26th.
How's that work for folks, those dates?
And
that work for you, Mike?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Well, and I'm not really part of the discussion, so.
Okay, that works for you? Let's do it. The 5th and the 12th.
The 5th and the 12th, okay. And then we'll get that ad into the paper and onto the website, so that people know what the process is to fill out those applications and when they would be due by. Okay.
Great.
So we'll probably make them do that Friday before the 5th, so that then I can distribute them to you, so you have a chance to look at those applications before the interviews on the 5th.
Sounds great.
That sounds really good, Bessie Jo, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'm just writing down a couple of notes, be right with you. Okay, upcoming meeting schedule. Annette?
Okay, well, tomorrow morning we have our next budget work session with Linda. We also have confirmed that the first hour tomorrow morning at 9 will be an update to you all by the Ponderosa Center Board. They'll be presenting via Teams. They may have somebody here in person, but we've encouraged them to use Teams so that we can easily see the PowerPoint slides, etc. So they're going to start the meeting in the morning, and then we'll do the budget. We do not have anything scheduled on July 1st for that special meeting. That's the first Thursday of every month, unless there's something the council would like to meet on, but nothing scheduled. On the 8th, we will get into the library project and talk to you in more detail about the updated project schedule, etc., what the big plan is for executing that project. And there's a number of things on there as well related to issuing the bonds. So that'll be most of it, along with the wildlife ordinance. And then at the end of the month, July, we have your joint meeting with the Board of Commissioners to talk about land use planning together. So I think that's a really big one. And then most of it's just regular contracts and things that we do annually, along with the budget process, of course. So are there any questions? I believe it's not on here yet, but I believe the Housing Advisory Committee has been meeting and will be bringing forward another set of recommendations for you. I'm looking really quick to see if it's on here yet. Michelle and I had been talking about that. So that's something to be scheduled, but is coming soon. Yeah. Any other topics or questions?
Have some of the new employees that are
yes.
department leads or
Yeah.
not necessarily department leads, but like your plan.
Yes, we had talked about that with the staff to get them introduced to you. And so internally, what we had talked about was, should we wait until we can be in person and you can meet them in person? Should we do it online? We did do the new police officers because they've been on for a little while and want to make sure you recognize their faces if you saw them. But if you're okay with online, we can have them do it that way, or
it'd be great.
That'd be great.
Either way, but I think the sooner, just so we know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, we can do that, no problem.
What's our time frame for tomorrow?
9 a.m. Until noon or 1. So we'll have food for you, breakfast, snacks, and things like that. Linda tentatively scheduled out 3 hours. She and I went through all of the information today. And depending on how many questions and things you have, it may not take that long.
And the Ponderosa Center was 1 hour, right?
Yeah, we told them 1 hour.
So 4 hours total.
At the max.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But if anyone has a hard stop time that we need to be aware of, just let me know so we can make sure we manage our time wisely so that you can get out of here.
I just favor being efficient.
Of course, yeah.
We'll do our best to help you with that, be efficient ourselves.
Things starting at 1, so.
Being out of here by noon would be.
Yeah, noon would be ideal. I'll try not to ask too many questions.
You should ask whatever you need to ask. Yeah, we should be fine. So we're primarily, you have your packet already, but it'll be kind of high level again on the operating budget because we're still trying to figure out what's going to come as a result of that new House bill. So Linda has some material to go over with you tomorrow on that property tax limitation bill, and that's going to put us in.
We have the lot, right?
We have the lot recommendation, and we're going to preview the new capital improvement plan budget that we're putting together, and then we'll touch on the latest and greatest info we have for the operating side of the budget.
All right.
Have another opportunity to get in the weeds before we bring it forward for adoption.
Great.
Yeah.
Good job, everybody, on staying on track tonight. Would someone please make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Can we do tomorrow, we're all coming here, or we?
Yeah.